So countries all across the globe yesterday were ushering in the new year 2025 with fireworks displays, light shows, and other sorts of celebratory events, and parties, and everything like that. And China celebrated the New Year's Eve with an elaborate drone show. They created stunning visuals like a dragon and other things of that nature, using over 10,000 separate individual drones. So just remember, when you were at home, try not to blow your fingers off while you're lighting your fireworks. China was practicing using drone swarms while also simultaneously putting on an entertaining event for onlookers as they ushered in the new year.
All right, mystery solved. Those unknown drones that have been buzzing around for months, baffling the public, the FBI, and the military, they weren't a mystery to the FAA. The White House revealed this week the FAA had authorized flights of so-called research drones in and around New Jersey. But the explanation has raised a whole new set of questions. Chief Investigator George Knapp is here live to ask a few of them. George.
Well, the first question that could have been asked by the White House press corps would start with two words. What the? The second question would be, was the entire leadership of the FAA off on a 2-month spelunking retreat deep inside the bowels of the earth and thus didn't know about these mystery drone swarms? I mean, FAA, what's the deal? The new White House spokesperson had a full plate of topics when she dropped this little bombshell.
The drones that were flying over New Jersey in large numbers were authorized to be flown by the FAA for research and various other reasons.
That is not an airplane.
Talk about the catch of the day. It's the Chinese spy balloon found by the U.S. Navy.
The U.S. Navy coming in with the China balloon.
You can see balloon fabric on the boat deck and boxes being unloaded on the dock. The balloon was discovered off North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Debris from the shoot-down lies scattered across 7 miles.
Some of it's intact. They'll be able to easily determine what it was and what it was used for.
We're learning more about the stunning moment the spy balloon was shot out of the sky.
Rank 1, blast 1, that is a big kill.
We have eyes on the balloon falling.
Vanished without a trace. The mystery deepening over a 30-ton rail shipment of chemical explosives, which disappeared on its way from Wyoming to California last month.
The cargo being transported on a Union Pacific Railroad freight consisting of 60,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate, which doubles as fertilizer, and a deadly explosive, similar to what was used in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing.
The quiet town of East Palestine, Ohio, became a household name when a freight train with a heavy cocktail of explosive chemicals derailed and burst into flames. But the true magnitude of the situation would only become known in the weeks and months to follow.
This program was considered the most cost-effective way to destabilize a country. Because if the target nation was dysfunctional enough, it would, in essence, do the work for you. A simple 3-stage maneuver that could topple a country's government from within. First stage was isolation. Disable their communication and transportation. Setting them up for the second stage. Synchronized chaos. Terrorize them with covert attacks and misinformation. Without a clear enemy or motive, people would start turning on each other. Done successfully, the third stage would happen on its own. What's the third stage? Civil War.
An F-35 fighter jet has crashed at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. The jet can be seen nosediving over the airbase before it crashes to the ground in a ball of flames. US military says the pilot on board ejected before the crash and has been transferred to hospital for evaluation. The cause is under investigation.
Tonight, with the investigation into the deadly medevac crash in North Philadelphia, at least 7 people are dead, including a young boy and his mother. One person on the ground was also killed. The horror all captured on a doorbell camera as the small medical transport plane crashed, igniting a huge fireball. At least 19 people were injured. It happened about 30 seconds after takeoff. The plane
We made a lot of enemies around the world. Maybe all this means is a few of them teamed up.
Which handles nearly 40% of all American container shipments. But there are concerns about Chinese influence that have sparked controversy. China has strengthened its foothold in Panama, with companies like Hutchinson Ports operating key canal adjacent ports since the 1990s. Critics warn that Beijing's deepening presence could allow it to pressure the U.S. or restrict shipping access, posing economic and security risks. Panama has raised canal tariffs. Recent droughts have also cut canal capacity, forcing ships to pay steep reservation fees, further inflating global shipping costs. President José Raúl Molino strongly opposes Trump's remarks, labeling them false and defending Panama's sovereignty over the canal. As Secretary of State Marco Rubio prepares to visit Panama, the future for this flashpoint in U.S.-China tensions remains uncertain.
Actually obligated to talk about it because of the treaties that Panama signed with the United States in the 1970s about this exact issue. Trump, rightly, is very concerned about the neutrality of the canal. You talk to people, China's taking down a lot of their signs, trying to avoid this. You talk to people who live or a family there, and China's trying to buy up a lot of the real estate on the canal, in addition to the ports that are dealing with the shipping. And if you look at the treaties that they signed, it says specifically that the United States reserves the right to invoke military force should the neutrality be threatened.
I didn't know that.
The Panama Canal proved a truly invaluable asset, sparing both cargo ships and warships the long journey around South America. When President Carter gave it away to Panama, Americans were puzzled, confused, and many outraged. With the passage of time, many have lost sight of the canal's importance, both to national security and to the U.S. economy. Not President Trump. When he demanded fair treatment for American ships and goods, many in the media scoffed. But the Panama Canal was not just given away. President Carter struck a bargain. He made a treaty. And President Trump is making a serious and substantive argument that that treaty is being violated right now. This committee has jurisdiction under the Senate rules over the Panama Canal, and today we will examine evidence of potential violations. President Trump has highlighted 2 key issues. Number 1, the danger of China exploiting or blocking passage through the canal. And number 2, the exorbitant costs for transit. Chinese companies are right now building a bridge across the canal at a slow pace so as to take nearly a decade. And Chinese companies control container ports at either end. The partially completed bridge gives China the ability to block the canal without warning. And the ports give China ready observation posts to time that action. This situation, I believe, poses acute risks to U.S. national security.
The number we talk about is 70% increase over these past years.
Okay. Where are you now in terms of your number?
We're at 35?
1.3.
1.4.
That number, 1.4%. That was in 2019, and it's barely budged. And this at a time when NATO countries are feeling increasingly threatened by their most powerful adversary.
Across the NATO alliance, there's been a really significant increase in defense spending and defense preparation in response to what Russia did in February of 2022.
For whatever reason, it didn't motivate the same levels of spending in Canada.
Canada wasn't always an outlier. Back in 2021, before the war in Ukraine began, you know how many NATO countries actually did meet their 2% spending goal? Only 6 out of 31 countries that signed the agreement. So Canada had lots of company. But for 2024, it's projected that 23 of them, or almost 75% of those countries, will have met that target. Canada is among only 8 that won't, and it sits pretty close to the bottom of the pack.
And Canada can't really hide behind that mob mentality anymore. It's an outlier, and it's not just perception. The data points to that.
And that 2% target isn't the only target Canada's missing either. NATO members are also expected to put 20% of their defense spending towards military equipment. Last year, Canada was one of only 2 countries that didn't. And according to a recent Canadian Department of National Defense report, almost half of Canada's existing military equipment is unavailable and unserviceable.
We underinvested for too long a period of time, and now we both don't have the numbers to back up our commitments in terms of the spending, but we don't actually have the results of what that spending would give us in terms of more aircraft, more vehicles, more ships to actually contribute operationally in a way that the Americans would care about.
Americans didn't like that plan.
Shamefully, Canada announced in the last few days or last couple of days that they won't be ponying up. They're not going to do their 2%. Why? Talk about riding on America's coattails.
What kind of signal does it send for Canada to be in the G7 when it essentially mocks the bare minimum of what's required?
But the Americans still weren't happy.
I do not speak for the President of the United States, the President-elect of the United States. If he were in this room, you would get a very large guffaw from him. I'm talking about 2032. It's got to be better than that.
But in their eyes, what's the rush? Why yet another announcement without a costed public plan to go along with it? Well, Donald Trump is the X factor.
He's weaponizing tariffs to get various concessions out of America's trading partners.
We basically painted a target on ourselves that says, hey, you can call us out for our defense spending.
And if we don't meet it, it's pretty clear there's going to be hell to pay.
In this same paper, there's also another slightly more threatening suggestion. First, there's the stick of tariffs. Second, there is the carrot of the defense umbrella and the risk of losing it. The risk of losing it, meaning losing the guarantee that the U.S. will defend you.
Going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, which is what it should have been years ago.
Certainly, if the U.S. administration is going to take a tough line and push for a higher number, they've got lots of leverage to really increase it. But I think there's a very reasonable consensus outside of Canada that 2% isn't sufficient.
So no matter where that number ends up, it's pretty clear that Canada is far, far away from where the Trump administration wants it to be. And that, in and of itself, is a vulnerability for this country at a time when its political leaders are trying desperately to project strength. It's worth noting that Trump wasn't the first American, or even the first American president, to think of acquiring Greenland. In the 1940s, just after the Second World War, the Truman administration saw Greenland as a military necessity. This map from a 1947 edition of Time magazine does a really good job showing how Greenland was seen as a strategic buffer between the US and Russia. Then, too, the US was told Greenland isn't for sale. But even today, the island is still seen as a defensive bulwark.
The shortest route from Europe to North America runs through Greenland.
Russia is a major Arctic player. It has, by far, the largest share of Arctic territory planet-wide, almost quarter of its territory is north of the Arctic Circle, and it controls 24,000 kilometers of Arctic coastline. Over the past few years, it has been steadily building up its military presence in the area, investing in air bases, naval ports, icebreaker fleets, upgrading its submarines.
Up here on the top of the world, there is a vast expanse of ice and of emptiness. And yet Russia has made deploying its military up here to these extreme conditions a real priority.
Global tensions find a new stage in the warming Arctic.
The Arctic is no longer a low-tension region.
The Arctic is opening up. These thick blocks of ice are melting, clearing the way for ships to travel through.
By the middle of this century, there will be no polar ice cap at the height of summer.
That's a big deal, because right now, the fastest way to ship goods from Europe to Asia is through the Suez Canal in Egypt. But as we've seen more and more, the Suez Canal is not always the most reliable route. There are essentially two ways you could do this. One is using what's known as the Northwest Passage. This would take you through the Arctic on the North American side, weaving through Canada's northern archipelagos. The other route through the Arctic is known as the Northern Sea Route. This one passes through the Russian side of the Arctic Ocean along the Siberian coastline. Both of these routes offer a much shorter path between Europe and Asia than the Suez Canal. It shaves off up to 5,000 kilometers. That's a third of the trip, or up to a full week of travel.
People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security.
So the four reasons I've outlined, or maybe just this one reason, explains the core of Donald Trump's stated desire to own and control Greenland. Whether he can do it, that's a whole other question. But it is worth noting, for years, Greenland has been looking for investors to help tap its potential wealth. And that is something the incoming American president knows how to do.
I don't think I've seen Donald Trump speak so clear, so authentic, so moving. I was really taken by these words. Please listen in and share with me. It's awesome.
65% of its population is under the age of 30. Like all young men and women, they seek great futures to build, great national projects to join, and a place for their families to call home. But this untapped potential, this tremendous cause of optimism, is held at bay by bloodshed and terror. There can be no coexistence with this violence. There can be no tolerating it, no accepting it, no excusing it, and no ignoring it. Every time a terrorist murders an innocent person and falsely invokes the name of God, it should be an insult to every person of faith. Terrorists do not worship God, they worship death. If we do not act against this organized terror, then we know what will happen and what will be the end result. Terrorism's devastation of life will continue to spread. Peaceful societies will become engulfed by violence, and the futures of many generations will be sadly squandered. If we do not stand in uniform condemnation of this killing, then not only will we be judged by our people, not only will we be judged by history, but we will be judged by God. This is not a battle between different faiths, different sects, or different civilizations. This is a battle between barbaric criminals who seek to obliterate human life and decent people, all in the name of religion. People that want to protect life and want to protect their religion. This is a battle between good and evil. When we see the scenes of destruction in the wake of terror, we see no signs that those murdered were Jewish or Christian, Shia or Sunni. When we look upon the strains of innocent blood soaked into the ancient ground, we cannot see the faith or sect or tribe of the victims. We see only that they were children of God whose deaths are an insult to all that is holy. But we can only overcome this evil if the forces of good are united and strong, and if everyone in this room does their fair share and fulfills their part of the burden. Terrorism has spread all across the world, but the path to peace begins right here on this ancient soil in this sacred land. America is prepared to stand with you in pursuit of shared interests and common security. But the nations of the Middle East cannot wait for American power to crush this enemy for them. The nations of the Middle East will have to decide what kind of future they want for themselves, for their country, and frankly, for their families and for their children. It's a choice between two futures, and it is a choice America cannot make for you. A better future is only possible if your nations drive out the terrorists and drive out the extremists. Drive them out. Drive them out of your places of worship. Drive them out of your communities. Drive them out of your holy land. And drive them out of this earth.
Difference between someone.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast, I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm